The sky above the hive was a sickly shade of iron and ash, as if the sun itself had been eaten by the rot of centuries. Smoke coiled through the air like living serpents, carrying the scent of burnt oil and despair. Somewhere far below, the shriek of machinery clashed with the distant wails of the damned. A hymn of suffering that had no composer, no audience, and no end. We move in these tunnels, crawling like insects through metal veins, and yet, the ritual was about to begin. They told us it was an honor, to be offered to the Emperor himself. They whispered of salvation, of eternal purpose. But even the youngest among us could sense the lie woven in their words, thick as the grime under our nails. My hands were raw, my stomach hollow, my throat parched. Hunger gnawed at us as fiercely as fear, and both were amplified in the suffocating torchlight of the sacrificial chamber. The chamber itself was more than walls. It was a cathedral of dread. The floor was slick with unidentifiable fluids, the air heavy with incense that could not mask the metallic tang of blood. Statues of armored angels loomed above, faces frozen in eternal judgment, their eyes somehow alive, watching our trembling forms with disdainful patience. Every step I took echoed, and in those echoes I could hear the ghosts of the many who had come before. Shattered men and women, their faith twisted, their screams engraved into the stone itself. A voice barked orders, mechanical, cold, practiced. The tech priests moved among us, their robes tattered and stitched with unholy sigils, their hands trembling with a zeal that was almost inhuman. They guided us forward, step by step, each of us thinking silently that this was the last moment we would ever truly belong to ourselves. Then the revelation came, like ice lancing through the marrow. Those who were chosen were not offered to the Emperor to be saved. They were offered to sustain the machine of his power. Their suffering was fuel, their death worship. What we had mistaken for honor was, in truth, another form of servitude. The whisper of destiny was nothing but a cruel trick, and as the first flame licked the edge of the sacrificial pit, I realized this was only the beginning. Long before the pit, before the chance, before the first trembling step toward the Emperor's flame, our world was different, or so the elders claimed. They spoke of a time when men tilled soil that had not yet been blackened by industry, when children ran barefoot over hills that had not yet been scarred by the engines of war. But such stories smelled of memory, not truth. Memory in this hive was a dangerous luxury. The past was a stranger, often a lie. The Imperium did not arrive with fanfare. It came like a shadow, creeping into our streets and alleys, twisting normality into ritual, bending the weak to its will. At first, they offered protection, laws, and salvation. We welcomed them, naive and starving. But protection came with chains, and salvation demanded obedience we could scarcely understand. Families were broken into work brigades, children conscripted before they could even speak properly, and the old, those who remembered freedom, were burned for heresy. Our first sacrifices were not to the Emperor, at least not openly. They were for control, for fear. They were proof that the machinery of power would grind us down, bone by bone, until we forgot that we had ever been free. I remember one such child, barely 12, her eyes wide and wet, her mouth trembling as the tech priests recited prayers we no longer understood. Her name is lost now, but her scream lingered in the stone like smoke, a permanent echo in our history. Even in the earliest days, there were tales of betrayal, brothers turning on brothers for a scrap of bread, mothers selling daughters to silence the hunger pangs, friends watching friends march to their doom and smiling politely, as if obedience could shield them. Survival was a bitter tutor, cruel and unforgiving. Every act of kindness was a gamble, every act of resistance a sentence. Yet, in the shadows of these horrors, myths began to grow. Legends of the Emperor himself, a god of unimaginable might, who could see all, punish all, and reward the worthy. Stories whispered that a life given in his name was exalted, that suffering was sanctified. But we learned quickly, myths were tools, forged by the powerful to justify power. They told us we were honored in our death, but the truth was colder. We were fuel for a machine that demanded faith without understanding. And in that, our humanity began to erode. By the time the first warp storms tore across the sector, scattering entire worlds into madness and flame, we had already learned our place. We were fodder. We were cogs. And yet, there was something in the fear, in the endless toil, that bound us together. A grim solidarity that whispered, "Survive today, even if tomorrow belongs to fire." But the first warp storm was only a hint of what was to come. It carried with it whispers, subtle and strange, seeping into the minds of those closest to the rituals. Some laughed at nothing. Others wept at shadows. Madness did not announce itself. Crept, patient and hungry. And by the time we understood, we were no longer sure if the Emperor was our master, or the thing in the storm that devoured hope before it devoured flesh. We rise before the sun, though the sky rarely shows its face. In the hives, the light is artificial, the air heavy with smoke and the tang of oil. Our bodies are already aching, our stomachs already empty. Hunger is a constant companion, sharper than any blade, a pain that gnaws at the edges of thought and sanity. Bread is thin, water thinner. If you are lucky, you survive the morning ration. If not, you are left hollow, trembling in the corridors, eyes hollow as the bone you've been reduced to. Work begins immediately. We sweep the endless corridors, repair machinery that groans like dying beasts, and carry supplies that weigh more than we can bear. The overseers patrol these halls, clad in ceramite and steel, faces hidden behind masks that have seen nothing and yet judge everything. Their presence is a constant threat. A wrong glance, a slow movement, a whispered complaint, and you are dragged away. No one returns unchanged. Some come back missing limbs, others with eyes that no longer focus, voices echoing a madness we dare not name. Faith is another form of labor. Before the morning meal, we are corralled into the great halls, where chants fill the air like smoke. We kneel, we repeat the prayers, we praise the Emperor for our suffering. Some of us laugh quietly at the absurdity. Others weep, but the tech priests notice nothing. Or perhaps they notice everything, and take pleasure in the quiet despair. We do not know. Some have speculated that madness is required here, that to endure, to survive, one must surrender part of the self. I am not sure we are given the choice. Punishment is swift, arbitrary, and public. I have seen a man stripped to the waist, his flesh branded with heresy symbols for failing to clean a corridor in the correct pattern. Another time, a child spilled water onto the sacred floor. The overseer made an example of him, dragging him through the hive until his screams were a chorus for the morning shift. Hunger, fatigue, fear, they twist together until morality becomes meaningless. We are not allowed to comfort one another. A hand offered in kindness may as well be a blade. Yet, life finds its small, fragile rituals. In hidden corners, we share scraps of bread, whisper names of the living, tell stories of the dead. We remember briefly that we are human, that small humanity is a rebellion, and every act of kindness, every stolen smile is punished eventually, but for those moments, it keeps us alive. Rituals mark the rhythm of life. Every day, a selection is made for the temple. Young, old, strong, weak, they do not discriminate. Those chosen are taken from their work, given robes, and walked toward the chambers where the Emperor's servants await. We do not speak of what happens next. It is enough to know that the screams echo through the corridors long after the victims are gone. Some of us pretend not to hear, but the echoes linger, embedding themselves into your bones. Madness creeps quietly into daily life. A whisper behind a door, a shadow at the edge of vision, a sudden chill that leaves your skin crawling. These are signs. Those who hear it first often do not last long. Those who resist it, longer. The warp is patient. It waits, watching our routines, learning the rhythm of our fear. We move through our days as insects move through glass tubes. Predictable, fragile, endlessly observed. And still, every day, some among us pray that we might be chosen, that our suffering might mean something. It rarely does. And when it does, it is not salvation, it is fuel. We are offerings to a machine that runs on hope turned bitter, faith turned fear, devotion turned despair. And even as the routine grinds on, We know that every day is closer to the pit, closer to the moment when we will be asked to give everything, and nothing will remain. At the end of this section, the audience fully feels the claustrophobic, oppressive daily life. Hunger, fear, faith, and madness, all leading naturally into the machinery of oppression, where the ruler's cruelty is explained in full cinematic detail. Power in the hive is not held, it is administered, like poison, drip by drip, until obedience is no longer a choice but a reflex. The rulers, the overseers, the tech priests, they do not need to speak to dominate us. Their presence alone is enough. Every corridor, every stairwell, every dimly lit chamber is designed to remind us of our insignificance, our replaceability. Cameras, sensors, and chanting automata keep watch. A slip, a stumble, a hesitation, and the machinery of punishment begins. Executions are both ritual and demonstration. One morning, we witnessed a man, accused of whispering treasonous prayers, chained above the forge. Sparks flew beneath his feet as the machinery activated, arms and gears moving with precision to carve a lesson into his flesh. We were forced to watch, for hours, as the fire did not consume him but marked him, turned him into a living illustration of obedience. The overseers nodded approvingly, as if evaluating an artisan's work. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was education. Obedience was our only lesson. Rituals are the backbone of their power. Every action, no matter how mundane, is framed as a holy obligation. Sweep the floors, pray in unison, maintain your clothing in perfect alignment. All are rites that strengthen the perception of control. Even defiance becomes ritualized. A tremor of fear, a whispered mutter, an absent-minded glance toward the forbidden. The machinery notices, catalogs, and punishes. Randomness is key. Predictability breeds resistance. We were tools, yes, but not ignorant ones. Every punishment carried a lesson. Every small kindness was a risk. Every act of rebellion, even silent, was a spark quickly extinguished. And yet, the overseers were not omnipotent. Chaos crept at the edges. The warp whispered to the desperate and the hungry, promising freedom in exchange for devotion to something darker than the emperor. But to answer that call was to court inevitable horror. The irony of our existence was sharp. In a world ruled by absolute cruelty, the only true freedom was found in the embrace of a greater, unimaginable terror. Symbols reinforced fear. Every mark on the wall, every banner, every crude carving in blood was a message. We are watched. The emperor sees all. Obedience is survival. And yet, even these symbols were flawed, misused, and absurd. A tech priest once declared that the wrong placement of a sigil on the sacrificial altar would invoke wrath. But when the ritual was performed by a more senior priest, the mistake went unnoticed. Irony, silent and cruel, threaded itself through every corner of the hive. The powerful terrified us with their faith, while their faith was often as arbitrary and fragile as our own. And through all this, the machinery of oppression did not merely punish. It shaped thought, eroded hope, and crafted loyalty where none existed. We learned to bow, to look away, to internalize fear as faith. We were trained to see horror as normal, cruelty as divine, and suffering as honor. Yet beneath the surface, whispers persisted. Stories of those who resisted, who survived the machinery's grasp, who dared laugh at it or mock it in secret. These whispers were dangerous, fleeting, but they reminded us that machinery, no matter how vast, relies on the weakness and compliance of its cogs. The power structure escalates daily, subtly, invisibly, crushing dissent before it rises. And yet we endure, not because we believe in mercy, justice, or the emperor. We endure because the machinery will not pause. Life, as defined here, is motion in fear, labor in despair, ritual in obedience. And the closer we move toward the pit, the more we understand that our suffering is the very fuel that keeps the machinery running. The first sign was subtle, a tremor beneath the steel floors, a whisper in the ventilation shafts. At first, we told ourselves it was nothing, the machinery's usual groan, the echo of our own fatigue. But soon, the tremors became shakes, and the whispers became voices, insidious and seductive, speaking truths we were too terrified to name. Chaos had arrived. Not in armies, not in firestorms, but in the slow, insidious corruption that burrowed into our minds like rats into decaying walls. The warp storms came next. They were not like the storms we had endured before. These were alive. Thunder ripped with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient. Lightning crackled, black and violet, carrying the stench of ozone and burnt flesh. The walls of the hive shuddered, and machines faltered as if recoiling in fear. Those near the surface were flung into death by the wind, while deep below, the air thickened with whispers, and we could feel our sanity strain at the edges. A man screamed for hours before anyone could silence him, though silence did not come from comfort. It came from the fear of being next. Raids followed, not just from the physical enemy, though chaos cults did strike, wielding mutated horrors and fire, but from our own despair made manifest. Friends vanished in the night, claimed by unseen hands, or returned in shapes that were wrong, twisted by unseen forces. Flesh rippled where it should not, eyes glimmered with colors that existed only in nightmares, and their whispers carried promises and threats in equal measure. We learned quickly. No act of courage, no prayer, no loyalty would protect you. The universe did not reward virtue. It rewarded fear, survival, and opportunism. Rituals escalated alongside the storms. The sacrifices became more grotesque, more elaborate. The chants, once a chorus of solemn devotion, twisted into screaming hymns, celebrating suffering as both penance and sustenance for the emperor's power. I watched a priest impale a condemned man, then pause to bless him mid-scream, as if the agony itself could be consecrated. The irony was almost comical if it were not so absolute. Life and death were tools, wielded without thought, without mercy. Amid these horrors, the common folk, us, adapted in ways we never imagined. We learned to hide madness, to speak to shadows without being overheard, to nod in agreement while plotting nothing but survival. Hunger and fear sharpened senses, and we moved with a predator's caution through halls that were not meant for life, only observation. Yet even survival carried a cost. Every day, the warp's influence grew, and those who resisted it often did so only in secret, only enough to feel human, only long enough to wonder if humans still mattered at all. Sound became an enemy. A shriek from above, the clatter of machinery misfiring, the whisper of a figure we cannot see. All struck panic into the heart. Smells turned treacherous. Burnt oil mingled with strange rot that clung to our skin, and touch betrayed us. The air itself seemed to carry malign intent. Even the warmth of another human's hand could feel wrong, a harbinger of corruption, a reminder that no one was safe. And yet, there were moments that pierced the bleakness. A child laughed quietly in a hidden corner, oblivious to the horrors beyond. A prisoner whispered a legend of the Emperor's mercy. Whether true or a hallucination, it did not matter. These small sparks of life, however fleeting, made the darkness even sharper, because the contrast reminded us how utterly we had fallen. But that was only the beginning. Each event, each raid, each ritual escalated. Every day, fear grew, madness deepened, and the line between flesh and warp began to blur. There would be no heroics here, no salvation, only the slow, inexorable tightening of the Emperor's machinery, and the subtle, horrifying realization that some of us might not even reach the pit as we once understood it. Some would be taken, changed, consumed before the final act, leaving the rest to witness transformations that defied thought. And as the warp's whispers grew louder, and the storm's lightning struck closer, we understood with a collective shiver. Nothing in this hive would ever be safe again. The horror had become routine, but no one could endure routine without cost. Madness would claim many, faith would betray more, and those of us still clinging to reason would soon question if reason itself was a sin. The instruments of our suffering were as numerous as they were bizarre. Some were simple. Blades forged to carve, hammers designed to crush, hooks to suspend the living for hours of torment. Others were symbolic, imbued with purpose that none of us could comprehend. A tech priest would lift a cog-shaped talisman, mutter a prayer, and the condemned would shudder, not from pain, but from the significance we were too terrified to name. Every tool carried a message. Obedience is life. Resistance is fuel for someone else's survival. Ranged weapons, too, were both practical and ceremonial. Bolt pistols and las guns were wielded not just for enforcement but as a visual reminder. Your life hangs by a spark of metal and faith. Soldiers carried them like extensions of their loyalty, but those same weapons could be misfired in ceremony, used to scare rather than kill. I once witnessed a young recruit accidentally discharge a stub pistol mid-ritual. The overseer laughed quietly, amused at the randomness of fear. The irony was exquisite. Life, after all, was measured not by survival but by how well you feared. Marks and symbols were everywhere. Tattoos, burns, etched insignias, paint, and metal badges. Each carried meaning, some sacred, some bureaucratic, some both. A scarred cog on the shoulder indicated one's loyalty to the machine. A burn in the shape of an aquila, the double-headed eagle, marked the faithful condemned. Even the color of robes mattered. Red for the chosen, black for the heretic, gray for the undecided. We learned to read these symbols as instinctively as breathing. Our lives depended on it. Some tools were curious in their grotesque ingenuity. Flesh hooks with vibrating edges to wake sleepers. Clamps designed to prolong agony without ending it. Tubes that injected hallucinogens while keeping the body alive. The priests called these devices sacred, though we called them absurd. They were proof that no suffering could ever be natural. Every scar, every scream, every twitch had meaning, however perverse. And yet humor, quiet, bitter humor, persisted. A soldier might stumble over a ceremonial banner, or a priest might prick himself accidentally with a ceremonial needle mid-incantation. For a brief heartbeat, the hive would ripple with stifled laughter, quickly suppressed, but the contrast made the horror all the more vivid. Even in a world designed to crush humanity, the absurdity of their tools reminded us we were still alive, barely, painfully, laughing through the edges of despair. Symbols extended beyond the personal and into the architecture itself. Walls were carved with sacred scripts, floors inlaid with emblems of loyalty, ceilings adorned with icons whose meanings had long been forgotten. Every path we walked reminded us of the power hierarchy, the omnipresence of authority, and the futility of questioning it. Even a simple mistake, stepping on a glyph, misaligning a sigil, could invoke punishment as severe as the rituals themselves. Weapons, tools, and symbols were not merely instruments of control. They were language, doctrine, and faith combined. They told us our place, our limits, our purpose, and they made us painfully aware that every action, no matter how small, was observed. Every breath, every tremor, every heartbeat was noted and recorded. In such an environment, even thinking could become a crime. And in the end, these tools served one ultimate purpose: to remind us that the Emperor's power was not abstract. It was tangible, immediate, inescapable. Fear was a weapon, suffering a tool, obedience the armor we never truly wore. And yet, even as we endured, the smallest sparks of resistance or hope flared briefly. Defiant gestures too subtle for the overseers to notice, smuggled whispers of rebellion. The quiet humor that made our lives bearable in the unbearable. But these sparks were fragile. And when the next storm, the next raid, the next ritual came, they would vanish, leaving only the instruments behind, humming with the promise of more suffering to come. Even in the shadow of the Emperor's machinery, we were not entirely alone. Community existed in whispers, in shared glances, in the fleeting warmth of a hand briefly clasped in hiding. We huddled together in corners, exchanged scraps of food, shared half-forgotten stories. It was dangerous, fragile, and often fleeting, but it reminded us that we were human, that we could still feel. Trust was currency we could ill afford. Friends vanished without explanation, leaving empty bunks and lingering dread. Sometimes they were chosen for sacrifice. Other times, we never learned the truth. Some betrayed us for a ration of bread, a chance at favor, or merely to survive another day. Betrayal was endemic, a natural consequence of fear. You could not escape it. Even small kindnesses could bring ruin. A quiet word of comfort whispered to a condemned colleague might mark you as an accomplice. A gesture of compassion could be punished as harshly as outright defiance. And yet, resistance flickered in the cracks. Secret messages scrawled in soot behind machinery, gestures hidden in ritual postures, small acts of defiance in the shadows. A single man once tampered with a cogwheel just enough to slow the execution of a ritual, delaying the condemned and earning their briefest smile before the priests noticed. That smile lasted seconds, but it was a spark of humanity in a world designed to snuff it out. Paranoia, however, grew as quickly as hope. We learned to suspect everyone, even ourselves. A glance too long, a sigh at the wrong time, or even hesitation could betray thought, intention, or weakness. In this environment, even community carried risk. Friendships became strategies, alliances tactical, smiles potentially deadly. Trust became instinct, measured in microseconds, and betrayal lurked behind every corner. Despite this, small acts of kindness persisted. A ration secretly shared with a starving child. A whispered warning of a patrol's approach. A hand silently placed on a shoulder to steady someone trembling in fear. Each act was a rebellion against the machinery, a testament to what remained of our humanity. But for every act of courage, punishment loomed, often disproportionate and indiscriminate. The machinery was not just punitive, it was educational. It taught lessons in fear, obedience, and despair, ensuring that rebellion, however noble, came at a devastating cost. And yet, the collective spirit, fragile, battered, haunted, persisted. Stories circulated of those who had resisted quietly, lived to tell the tale, or vanished but left behind a seed of hope in the form of whispered legend. These tales were often incomplete, contradictory, but they reminded us that even in the darkest corridors, the human mind could still plot, plan, and, if only briefly, reclaim a sense of agency. But the cracks in our humanity were small, and the machinery was vast. Every act of resistance was met with escalation, every rebellion punished with a cruelty designed to break not just the body, but the mind. Even as we whispered, plotted, and comforted one another, legends, myths, and famous examples, even in this hive of despair, stories survive. Not of heroes triumphant, not of hope realized, but of individuals whose suffering, courage, or madness became legend. These tales are told quietly, whispered in shadows, serving as warnings or grim inspiration. The martyr of the first pit, she was called Alara, barely 16, when chosen for the first mass sacrifice of our sector. Her body was weak, her hands trembling, but her gaze never faltered. She did not scream. She did not plead. Instead, she recited the prayers perfectly, even as the priest's blades approached. Some say the emperor smiled upon her. We, who watched, knew only the echo of her death, the way it reverberated through the chambers and sank into our bones. Her legend became a whisper, a reminder that courage could not save you, but it could endure beyond flesh. The betrayer of Ash's Kale, a once respected laborer, betrayed his unit to save a morsel of food for himself. At first, it was a small act, a lie, a diversion. But the machinery noticed. His comrades were chosen for punishment. He survived. For a time, he walked among us untouched, eyes haunted. Madness grew quietly inside him, manifesting in mutterings, twitching limbs, and hallucinations of those he betrayed. Eventually, the warp claimed him fully. His body twisted into something unrecognizable, his mind screaming accusations in voices that were not his own. Kale's story became a lesson. Betrayal may grant life, but the cost is far heavier than death. The whispering child, a boy no older than 10, learned to speak to the warp without succumbing. He wandered the corridors unseen, muttering in tones that twisted the minds of the weak. Priests feared him, soldiers avoided him, and yet he survived. Some claimed he was blessed, others cursed, but the truth was more terrifying. He was neither human nor fully warp, a bridge between worlds. His presence reminded us that corruption could be subtle, even beautiful, and utterly unstoppable. These tales serve as punctuations in our suffering, emotional spikes in a rhythm of dread. They are legends not of triumph, but of endurance, horror, and the cruel ironies of fate. Each story reinforces the truth we already know. Survival is fleeting, morality is a trap, and the machinery of oppression is merciless. Yet even amidst these tales, the smallest spark of humanity can appear. A whispered kindness remembered, a brief moment of solidarity in the face of execution, the shared terror of an impossible event. All these become part of the narrative, interwoven with horror. The legends are not comforting. They are mirrors. We see ourselves in them, fragments of what we were and warnings of what we may become. And as we recount these stories, the hive seems to pulse in response. Walls echoing, shadows lengthening, whispers lingering. Each legend is a thread in a tapestry of dread, binding us tighter to the machinery, to the warp, to the inevitability of suffering that has defined our existence. But even with these legends, one truth remains immutable. The stories do not end well. Courage is temporary, betrayal devours, and even cleverness is a fleeting shield. There is no sanctuary here, no safety, only endurance until the machinery claims you, until the warp whispers your final lullaby. We endure until we cannot. These words are neither comfort nor command. They are observation, plain and absolute. Life in the hive is a study of suffering, a meditation on futility, and a testament to the cost of existence beneath the emperor's gaze. Each day we live is a lesson in endurance. Each breath we take, a reminder that survival does not equate to meaning. We have seen what hope looks like: a fleeting smile, a whispered story, a hand held briefly in defiance of fear. But these moments are fragile, transient, and ultimately devoured by the machinery we serve and the chaos that waits beyond it. Humanity persists only in fragments, shards of memory, glimmers of instinct, brief sparks that burn out before they can illuminate the darkness. The warp whispers in every shadow, in every crack of stone, in every pause between ritual chants. It does not ask, it claims. It does not negotiate, it consumes. And we, who once believed ourselves masters of our fate, are reduced to cogs in a machine we barely understand. We sacrifice body, mind, and spirit, not for enlightenment, not for honor, but because the system demands it, and the consequences of refusal are unimaginable. Faith, once a bastion, becomes a tool for oppression, a scaffold upon which suffering is stacked and normalized. Madness, once rare, becomes a natural consequence of proximity to the warp and the rituals we endure. Hunger is constant, fear is instinct, and hope is a memory, faded and unreliable. Our lives are measured not in accomplishments but in the endurance of pain. And yet we endure, because to stop is unthinkable, and to act against the machinery is death in its most deliberate form. Even the emperor, the distant god whose name is invoked with trembling reverence, is abstract in the face of our suffering. Whether he watches, whether he cares, whether he even exists in the way we pray is irrelevant. Our existence is neither for reward nor salvation. It is fuel for a system that will continue long after our flesh is gone, long after our names are forgotten. We are offerings not because we are worthy, but because there is no alternative. And so we reflect. Suffering is inevitable. Sacrifice is constant. Humanity is fragile. Faith is exploited. Madness is inevitable. Survival is Pyrrhic. And when the final ritual is complete, when the warp has claimed its due, when the machinery has ground its last lesson into bone and soul, what remains? Nothing. Only the echo of screams, the faint odor of burnt flesh and oil, and the lingering question of what it means to endure when endurance itself carries no reward. We endure until we cannot, and then we cease. Not as heroes, not as martyrs, not as saviors. We cease as the inevitable consequence of a world designed for suffering, a system designed to consume, and a universe that does not care. And in that final, silent moment, the lesson is clear. There is no hope here. There is only the horror, the machinery, the warp, and the fragile, fleeting spark of humanity that burns until it is extinguished.